All right. Well, I mean, it's still going through like a little. It does a little loading thing whenever I press it, so it takes like a couple seconds.
All right.
Little spinning dots. Yeah, there we go. It says we're live now.
It's not. Okay, yes. All right, we're live. Hey, everybody. How are you guys doing this Tuesday?
Hello,
I
hello to
just,
all.
I just got up from a nap like not even 15 minutes ago. I barely had enough time to even prepare for the stream. Had a weird dream while I was napping about being in a movie theater with Ron Paul and him having a dementia episode next to me.
What?
I don't dream logic, man. I don't fucking know.
I mean, that's better than the kind of dreams I have. I mean, I almost never dream. I know the difference. And it's not like I don't remember dreams because I know the difference between having a dream and not remembering it and not having dreams. And most of the time, I don't have dreams. You know what happens the last time I had dreams? In those
But
dreams, a giant wasp, as in like 3 inches or 2 inches long, would just land on me.
yeah, you said you hate those things, so
You like I don't. It's not just that I hate those things. I have a phobia of them. Do you have any idea like how freaking horrifying that is to me?
um, yeah, I could probably guess, but
It's pretty bad.
I wouldn't believe it. Those are freaking monsters.
all right. So I guess we could just cut to the subject of today's stream because we'll probably be going on for like 2.5, 3 hours. So for those of you who are in the Discord server, you know that I have plans to talk about some of the BreadTube quote unquote community on YouTube, which for those of you who aren't aware, it's essentially an informal group of like Marxist content creators who spread agitprop on the platform. You know, I guess fine, whatever. They're gonna make the type of content that they do. It's just that people haven't really been challenging them, and they've been getting a lot of favor in the algorithms, while pretty much everybody who's not some form of identitarian has been getting directly targeted. So definitely there is demand for people to there's demand for challenging those people, and I've recognized that demand. And within that community there's a group of channels particularly which they draw sort of like the pit of my disdain for that community, and that is the channels which attempt to masquerade themselves as sort of innocuous members of other communities. For instance, there's a channel, Second Thought, which is a BreadTube channel that attempts to masquerade itself as a sort of Isaac Arthur science metaphysics discussion channel. There's Jack Saint, which tries to dress up his content as a media review type channel in the same vein as like Mr. Enter or Turkey Tom. And then today, the person we're going to be talking about, Knowledge Hub. You want to talk about Knowledge Hub, Heretic?
Honestly, I don't follow Knowledge Hub all that much, but it's very much falls into that vein that Esso was talking about earlier of people who attempt to model the style of popular YouTubers who are otherwise apolitical, or at least mostly apolitical, where they don't really insert their political biases or try to mitigate them as much as possible in their content. Now, this isn't always the case, as if I recall correctly, there's a cartoon commentary channel that's trying to model itself after Mysterious Mr. Enter. Now, Mr. Enter does do a lot of commentary on political or even like politicized topics. For example, he's hugely critical of censorship in Silicon Valley. He doesn't really make a lot of explanations as to how those are government agencies, as far as I've seen, but he is still very popular, and his commentary, at least in my own opinion, because I am subscribed to him, is very high quality. However, you can imagine that there's a lot of Marxists who think, oh, Mr. Enter is popular. People want to see it, means that people want to see cartoon or commentaries. That means that I can put a Marxist spin on it.
Here's the thing, though. I don't have a particular issue with somebody seeing that and then saying, "Oh, I just want to do the same thing, except to help spread my ideology." My criticism here is not the fact that there are Marxists inspired by that style. My criticism is that in their content, there is no indication that they're actually making Marxist arguments.
Yes.
They make statements that are very implicitly attempting to spread Marxist ideas. Like they'll reference labor value, for example, or they'll reference in the case of Second Thought, in their recent video, the America's overwork obsession. It was that entire video was basically an attempt to try and put forward the idea of primitive accumulation by consciously mischaracterizing it in a way that not only divorces it from what Marx actually said, but also puts forward the idea without actually addressing the idea or attempting to explain why it's valid. It's just kind of assuming that it's valid. So it's a form of propaganda, basically.
I was getting to that, actually. The part of the problem, you already said it. You have an entirely deceptive premise and presentation that pushes itself out as factual, unbiased information, but implicitly includes a lot of very Marxian concepts, labor value being a good example. So, yeah, this video that we're gonna be talking about in particular comes from Knowledge Hub, who attempts to present himself off as just some unbiased presenter of facts, when in fact he's just putting forward Marxist propaganda. And this is going to be an example of how, in our modern capitalist, quote unquote capitalist society today, that free markets encourage the free market capitalism we have today encourages businesses to engage in mind control. And this isn't really hyperbole. This is something that I've actually had people tell me that advertising is. This is something I've had in separate conversations that I imagine I'll get into over the course of this stream. But the basic idea is that just because advertising is effectively a science where people spend millions and even billions of dollars trying to figure out how best to persuade people towards buying their product, making it stand out among the various stated advertisements, and trying to best figure out what's in people's interests that would make them want to buy what they want to buy, that therefore it is tantamount to mind control, and that is immoral, apparently. Now, how it is they can come to that conclusion that it's immoral, I don't know. But that's something that they talk about quite a bit. And
yeah, just
we got a donation.
Your best friend bathrobe.
Ooh, nice. Say that pretty much every time we get a donation, but what's this saying? Who's it from?
In case you don't know, Esso and Winks, or Esso and Quispy can't hear the donations, but we got $5 from Kokuchen Winks. Much love from your best friend, Bathrobe Dwayne. Yeah, thank you very much, Bathrobe Dwayne, for your donation.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you want to, we are going to try to interact with the audience in the chat as much as possible, but if you do want to interrupt our chat with your own thoughts or have any questions that you'd like to have addressed at the highest quality, or at the highest priority, then the best way to do that would be to go to the description of the stream where there's a link to drop a tip, and you'll have your message put on stream.
Yeah, just really quick. You know what a kokujin is, heretic?
I don't actually.
Oh, it's the Japanese way of referring to a black person in a derogatory way. So basically, they're N-word. But
Yeah, thank you very much, Bathrobe Dwayne.
but just so longtime viewers of the Backalley Philosophy channel would know that I've written a response to Knowledge Hub before, and currently I consider it to be a terrible video that needs rewritten. To the point where I've considered rewriting it, but the point of that video was addressing the so-called natural monopoly problem. He actually put out 2 videos, and the second response that I made is significantly better because it's just an explanation of why monopolies can't happen. But at least why monopolies can't happen with the absence of state intervention. But yeah, I'd say that if you're interested, there's still watches that you'd consider amusing, at the very least. But yeah, Knowledge Hub, we definitely should respond to him a bit more, and I guess that's what we're doing today. As for the idea, the so-called propaganda model, which is something that you hear a lot about, it has various different forms, but the 2 most common are either the one proposed by Noam Chomsky, the manufacturing consent model. Well, it's not known as that, but it was popularized in a book called Manufacturing Consent. And a concept popularized by somebody known as a sociologist named B.F. Skinner called operant conditioning. And the problems with, I don't know, I guess we could get into the video, but we're going to be explaining the problems with both of those concepts as we go on.
All right. So anyways, let's get started.
Minute Maid pomegranate blueberry juice. Contrary to popular opinion, it doesn't actually contain all that much pomegranate or blueberry. Actually, it's about 99% apple and grape juice and a solid.
I'm gonna get my headphones really quick. I'm fucking sorry, I forgot. Yes, my bad.
I wonder what I am genuinely wondering where this is going. Where they're going to say, "Oh, it's mostly water, therefore it's not mostly juice."
It sounds like it's the setup to a pretty bad argument. I'll say that right now. All right. Let's see. Looking up audio and these things. Say something.
Oh, hi.
All right. Yep.
All right.
Got my headphones on. Nice.
All right. So I'm just going to start over from the beginning, even though the introduction is actually pretty obnoxious sounding.
This is Minute Maid pomegranate blueberry juice. Contrary to popular opinion,
I already hate
it doesn't actually contain all that much pomegranate or blueberry. Actually, it's about 99% apple and grape juice and a solid 0.5% of the namesake thrown in for good measure. This was brought up in court by a juice-based competitor, Pom Wonderful, who appears to have a bit of investment in the state of the pomegranate industry. They claim that they lost nearly $80 million because this Coca-Cola-owned juice subsidiary was selling a competing product at a low price without actually being pomegranate blueberry juice. Well, Coke won the case. Not because in reality this is pomegranate blueberry juice, but because if you look at the ingredients on the back, they are listed from most contained to least contained. Basically, it follows the FDA labeling, and they just didn't want to deal with this shit. Regardless, I think we can all agree
sounds like a government problem there, but also, can I just say how much this music makes me want to jump out the window?
It's very obnoxious, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that's meant to be the case. It sounds like what they're trying to do is to irritate you specifically in order to cause you. No. Hear me out. I actually have some insight into this, where it's a very common persuasive trick, where you can get people to experience certain emotions, and then in your messaging, you drive them towards experiencing, or you redirect those emotions to whatever it is you want them to be irritated at. So what you would do is, if you're in a confrontation with someone else and there's a third party there, who the person you're in a confrontation with does not has no reason to be mad at them, though they should, what you would do is get the person you're talking to angry, and then give them a reason to be angry, and then give them a reason to change or switch their attention towards the person you want them to be angry at. It's a form of emotional manipulation. And in this case, what they're doing is playing deliberately obnoxious music to make you feel annoyed at what this quote unquote Coca-Cola owned company did is annoying to you. So that's what I think this is about.
The
And now,
irony of all this. Sorry, go ahead.
no, continue.
The irony of all this is that really absent, the the privileges that the state gives the more corporate cartelized industries. Pardon me. This fad, in my opinion, would actually benefit the smaller pomegranate company, because they could basically go and say, "Hey, look, you want real pomegranate juice, real fruitful pomegranate juice? These guys don't deliver it, and we do." I mean, I know, for example, I've even seen commercials like those Life bars or whatever. The Cohen based Ordant bar did like a not campaign against the Cliff bars, and this basically what it is. They say, "Hey, you want pomegranate juice? We have it right here. Coca-Cola doesn't. This has mostly grape juice or water or whatever else in it." So the irony of this is that absent the state's monopoly on arbitration and the privileges it gives Coca-Cola as a big firm, this actually helps a smaller company out, and helps the free market exist.
Just what I was going to say is, aside from the fact that as you pointed out, there's not really any way for competitors to emerge because of the state's interventions making production more capital intense and structuring markets around debt cycles and central banking, and heavily making markets dependent on cartelized global supply chains. So the process of corporate globalization, and some people will say in the comments that's something that is a natural incentive. I would disagree, and so would Mises, Hayek, and Rothbard, but that's a different discussion altogether. My point that I was getting to, though, is just as well that when you have a legal framework, or when you have an arbitration framework, whatever you want to call it, structured around corporate law, and where the basis of whether or not something is valid or even counts as false advertising is whether or not it adheres to FDA guidelines, you're going to get shit like this, where the main ingredient can be, out of the top 3, can be pomegranate, but it's 95 to 99% apple. So, I mean, if anything, this is just a demonstration of how ridiculous licensing standards is, not false advertising or any sort of natural incentive that market-based firms have.
And I was just going to add that these courts actually, in a way, can be interpreted to be a subsidy towards big businesses like Coca-Cola, because they're insulated from the kind of advertising that would expose this kind of thing. Their beverage being mostly grape juice with a tiny amount of pomegranate in it, which would otherwise be latched onto by competitors, which actually do sell pomegranate juice. And instead, this matter is taken up to a government court, which of course rules according to whatever is, or however they interpret legislation to be. And as such, any sort of consumer awareness and consumer vigilance against this kind of predatory lying, deception, shenanigans that would otherwise exist, and to a certain extent does exist, but only in black and gray markets, is instead outsourced to the state, who of course are simply going to rule according to whatever happens to be in their interest at the time. In this case,
That's just what
it seems to be that because Coca-Cola was in compliance with advertising rules, that everything that they were doing was a-okay. When in the free market, I don't think anyone would care about what the FDA has to say at all.
Just what I was gonna add on to that is technically there's no reason that the courts even had to rule in favor of Coca-Cola. The reason that they did has everything to do with the fact that I would guarantee Coca-Cola probably had more political clout with the state than whatever this other organization that tried, this other corporation that tried to sue Coca-Cola did. And that's fundamentally because any pretense of these monopolized courts being there for the to arbitrate situations like this and to try and prevent people from false advertising. That's entirely just glorified public relations to give you the impression that they give a shit about you, essentially. No, in reality, they can do whatever they want. And as shown by the example provided, there's not really anything that you can do about it other than maybe complain to them. And, well, because there's no mechanism to hold them accountable, when you complain to them, they can just tell you to sit and spin.
Mm-hmm. Kajoltad says the way he says blueberry is horrible too. And that's what I was talking about earlier in terms of they're deliberately trying to annoy the audience so that they can redirect their annoyance towards Minute Maid and Coca-Cola. It's entirely part of their manipulation tactic. And now that you're aware of it, I imagine it's not going to be very effective on you in the future, because that's how magic works. Anyways,
it wouldn't surprise me at all if Tyler here from Knowledge Hub was aware that he was doing that, because rather ironically, given the subject matter of the video, Alt History and Knowledge Hub are companies at this point, as in they pay people to edit their videos and they operate for profit. So I would be willing to bet some of that money is invested in advertising techniques.
Oh, I'm sure. And there's all sorts of books about this that we're going to be going into the future. Ironically, I haven't watched a video, but I imagine in the future he's going to be talking about these psychological manipulation tactics that he himself has already used in the video. It is true that this is a science that people have studied and debated and experimented to try to figure out what forms of advertisement, what forms of conveying information allow you to achieve a certain desired result and what those results are going to be, and that those results are actually fairly predictable.
And the only thing that anyone here is really disputing is whether or not you can deterministically arrive at outcomes based on advertising techniques. And until the day that a 5-year-old is made to want to buy a dialysis machine because a commercial told him to, well, I'm going to continue holding my breath on that one.
All right. I'm pretty sure you got the analogy backwards. But anyway, should we continue?
All right.
Marketing a product in a misleading way or flat out lying about what you get. As long as man has ventured into adventures of capitalism, there has been those trying to pull a fast one on us. Before the 20th century, virtually...
Yeah, I just want to pause there because you're in for a good time when they start talking about capitalism. The moment you bring up that word, honestly, it's kind of the moment I know that I'm dealing with someone who is either not thinking or someone who's deliberately trying to deceive you.
Note also how to try to say it from the 20th century onwards is like even more. even aside from the materialist perspective that capitalism happened before the 20th century, I mean, you got a mindset of like
That's
as though it's only happened since the 20th century started. Like, there hasn't been like people lying and deceiving each other for all the time back to when we were fucking apes. I mean,
that is that's a prime example of the of what I was referring to earlier, where Marxist concepts are subtly referred to, but they're treated as though they're completely uncontroversial. That for the record, that is essentially the Marxist narrative of history. That capitalism is a political system, and it started roughly around the turn of the 20th century, late 19th century.
Yeah, that seems about right. And I can imagine the way they're going to go into this. They're going to, I mean, we've seen it all before. We've seen it probably hundreds of times, where they're going to use obfuscating terms and equivocation to try to confuse people especially into accepting terms like capitalism as completely valid. That all of these things are just capitalism's fault, that it's a system of capitalism that incentivizes this, and they're never, ever going to define their terms. And
if you were to prevent them with the criticisms I just presented you, what they would say is, yeah, corporate law is part of capitalism, which is why I've spoken about this before, but that's a big part of the reason I've sort of, developed some problems with the concept, because one of my major criticisms of it is that it doesn't seem to have any bounds in what it can be describing, and because of that, it doesn't really seem to explain anything. It seems to obfuscate discussion more than it does help us understand what's being talked about, because it's a term where everyone has a different understanding of what's being discussed, and people just project their own understandings onto it.
All right, and Chaser asks, what if they bring up capitalism positively?
I don't know, depends on what they mean. I still am going to have a problem with it as a concept.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't say anything about them. When I pause a segment, I didn't say that when you bring up capitalism, or when you bring up capitalism negatively, that's proof that you don't know what you're talking about, or that they're trying to deceive you. I said, when they bring up capitalism, period, that's proof that they don't know what they're talking about or trying to deceive you. Or at least that's the impression I get, simply because I understand that capitalism is fundamentally a meaningless anti-concept. It doesn't describe anything. It describes multiple contradictory terms, and fundamentally, there are no boundaries by which something can be and cannot be capitalism.
The same thing was true when Mises referred to the concept. I mean, when he used the term, he referred to basically a free market, but his idea of a free market is a political system that's imposed onto society. Those were his words. It's a system of private ownership for profit, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But as I've argued, libertarians necessarily are skeptical of political systems. But my point was, I would object to that characterization as well, even though that's a bit closer to a position that I would find reasonable. It's just, why are you using that term to describe this system, especially given your admitted acknowledgement of its political and historical connotations?
I've long said in both the Backalley server and other servers that some of us need to get together and start a basic counter-economic betting pool, like a numbers game, around what arguments both Marxoids and like Sutdims will say against capitalism or free markets, because they're so easy to bet. I mean, literally, it's usually only 1 out of 10 or 20 responses they'll give to each thing you say or ask of them. And I mean, you can make a lot of money in the counter-economic making betting pools on what they're going to say next. And I think I make myself a quick buck that way.
All right. Anyways, I'm going to continue.
Precedent existed for dealing with this sort of behavior, and as such, we saw the birth of the snake oil salesman. A guy would go
that's
into
a
town,
lie.
promote some
He just claimed that there was no way to deal with false advertising practices prior to presumably some later point, and that's just an outright lie.
I'm actually genuinely concerned if this person has any idea that, contracts existed for a very long time. And even before then, there was a culture of keeping your word, about maintaining your honor, and that sort of thing. If you didn't have honor, which is just a very simplified way of saying if you weren't trustworthy, if you didn't have a good reputation, then people just generally don't want to associate with you. They want nothing to do with you because they're going to stab you in the back. And that's the way you deal with false advertising. It's funny because I think I've told this story before, where I was talking with a democratic socialist about, I believe it was healthcare, and the topic was brought up about how you can trust people without government oversight. And I think I was bringing up that topic actually, and then they went into a story. So this is the third-hand account of the story, but the story that they went into is that they were talking to their friend who gets drugs from the internet, from the deep web, or from the dark web. And he asked the question, well, how do you know that the drugs you're getting are of high quality? How do you know that, like, the cocaine you're snorting is not just crushed glass? And he says, like, look, we actually can't. So as a result, we have to be very careful about who we get our drugs from. As such, reputation is extremely important to drug dealers. The moment that the quality of their drugs slips, let alone starts to become dangerous, is the moment that their reputation is screwed. So they have a very strong incentive to maintain a very high quality at a reasonable cost, all without requiring any government oversight whatsoever. So, yeah, there are plenty of ways of dealing with it. A lot of them already exist in the market, in the white market today, where you have sites like Yelp and others like YouTube reviews for movies that allow consumers to decide and tell each other, communicate among each other what products are good, what products are bad, what they're like, all without requiring any government coercion whatsoever. In fact, there's a lot of people, some of whom you could probably name off the top of your head, who have become extremely wealthy doing exactly that.
And even in instances where, say, for example, the cocaine that a person did order from the dark web was just crushed up glass, and it killed them after they did it. Well, how would they be able to hold the seller responsible? Well, you could associate with a mutual aid society, or you could have insurance. There are a couple different ways of finding the person who did it,
Mm-hmm.
and then holding them accountable, either to immediate family, or if the person who died didn't specify, maybe just the organization could consider themselves beneficiaries. But the example of the snake oil salesman, I can't actually believe that he gave this example. The fact that he gave this example is sort of active proof that he's being uh, disingenuous, which is why I called him a liar instead of just making fun of how wrong he is. Because there was snake oil salesmen they couldn't set up a store. They had to constantly travel around, and they had to just constantly change their name, because if it was found out that they were fraudsters, well, as you said, they wouldn't get any business. And it was an extremely unstable practice even back in the late 19th century, because a lot of the times when they were outed, it wasn't just their names, it was what they were claiming to sell people or like descriptions of their practice. So, I mean, the gig was up pretty quickly if one of these people came along and tried to do that.
And
In fact,
I can't imagine it is even very profitable, even in its day, even in its heyday. In fact, I'm not even sure if being a snake oil salesman was a thing that actually happened, other than a few like marginal cases. I wouldn't be surprised if its origin comes entirely from some fictional story a long time ago that was largely
yeah,
used for propaganda purposes.
well, I know that the example of snake oil is itself something that like probably never happened, as in there's not really any evidence that there were a lot of people going around selling bottles of snake oil and claiming that it was cures for various diseases. That's a historical myth, but there were people selling hokey things, traveling with circuses, and that goes to tell you how reputable this practice was. The fact that they couldn't even travel on their own; they had to be tag-alongs to circus acts, essentially. And that's probably the closest to any sort of like consistent snake oil business that ever existed.
Mm-hmm.
Was those people. But anyway, did you have anything else to say?
Nah, I don't really have anything. You've covered pretty much everything. This whole thing is so dishonest, and honestly, I get the Crucible vibes from the idea of the snake oil salesman. Are you familiar with the Crucible?
Yes, I am. But what was the point you were trying to draw with that?
Basically, that the idea of the snake oil salesman is entirely fictional. It's put for. It might have had some it might have some historical backing, but is ultimately a form of propaganda that existed a long time ago, but has impressed itself into the public consciousness so much so that people have a hard time differentiating fact from fiction.
I'm not going to say that nobody did that because actually, I know as a matter of fact that that's sort of how John Rockefeller's dad got his start. But yeah, to say that it was just a common part of life, is historically inaccurate to say the least.
Yeah. And people were burned for being witches in Salem. The Salem witch trials did happen, but to describe it the way that the Crucible did is the whole story was just pure propaganda. Anyways, I'm going to keep going.
Concoction he claimed could cure all ailments from dysentery to super AIDS, and before anybody could catch on, he'd hit the road and play more suckers like a fiddle in the next town. Snake oil was the primary ingredient listed in these mixtures. Snakes were magical back in the 1800s. But don't worry, almost no snake oil actually contained snakes.
Yeah, this is just what we were talking about earlier. And what you were talking about, that the business was so unstable that they kind of had to keep going because otherwise they would probably be killed. At the very least, they wouldn't have any customers, so they wouldn't be able to live there.
I guess we could continue. I don't know where he's getting this idea that snakes were seen as magical. I think he's just making shit up now. Rattlesnakes were. I don't know how to tell you this, man, but they were considered probably even more dangerous than they are now, and they were less understood than they are now because back then there was no antidote, and people didn't know what antidotes were, or at the very least, antidotes were very primitive. So,
I mean, at the very least,
Sorry.
at the very least, they might have been able to market it supposedly as like a cure for snake bites. But I mean, we already have anti-venom, so that's not exactly a crazy invention. But I mean, yeah, he's just kind of pulling stuff out of his butt at this point.
I'm trying to think of any cultures historical that might have seen snakes as magical. And the closest example I can think of is the Quetzalcoatl from Aztec mythology, which even then it's a very specific deity, more like a magic snake rather than magic snakes.
I mean, there are those weird communities of evangelicals that have like snakes in their churches, or maybe snake charmers, but I don't think that's seeing snakes as magical as much as it is just using them for some sort of show trick. But yeah, that's another thing that I don't really like about Knowledge Hub, as you'll Freudian slip there, Knowledge Hub non-compete, but something that I really don't like about Knowledge Hub is, the BreadTube community. They tend to be very liberal with their interpretations of historical events, because everything basically their goal is not to have an honest discussion. It's to try and contextualize everything within the Marxist narrative of history, which is not too difficult to do, because sort of like what we were talking about earlier with concepts that don't have any bounds for what they can describe, nothing can really count against the Marxist narrative of history. But Knowledge Hub just makes things up. Like, he just straight up, if there's a gap in the narrative that he's trying to make, I'm pretty sure he just looks at his script and is like, what kind of bullshit can I make up in order to make this seem more plausible?
I'm entirely sure that he's just going to be throwing stuff around, and if you were to confront him about it, he would probably just say, "Oh, don't take that seriously. It's just a joke." He's going to pull the old John Leibowitz on us.
I guess we could continue.
Yeah, you know what I mean by John Leibowitz?
Yeah, John Stewart, right?
Yeah, Daily Show. He would be confronted about his socialism and just said, "No, it's a joke."
Oil actually contained snakes, since I assumed that these snakes ran really fast. As the salesman regaled the gathering public of his whimsical medicine, he would plant an associate in the crowd who would come up and prove that the medicine works. No funny business here, buddy. This was the shill. As consumerism boomed and the new century loomed, people became a bit more wary of what they were actually buying.
Can we pause really quick? Shill bidding was a practice at auctions. So
Yep.
I mean, that is something that actually is actually true, but that's something that started with auctioneers, not snake oil salesmen. Also, but also, this is another thing, and it's not just with these like BreadTube imitation channels that it's basically like all the BreadTubers do this, and this is another thing that kind of irritates me, is they don't actually argue against other people, or like they make a note specifically to try and not address other people's arguments as they're presented. They claim that this is because they don't want to platform the other people, that they have ideas that spread racism or whatever. But the truth of it is this is actually a political strategy that's been used by hack campaigns for. It's been used by hack campaigns for decades now, but essentially, if you don't actually address another person, but rather a cartoonish representation of their argument, or you create a scenario where you're arguing against their position, what that allows you to do is it allows you to unilaterally control the framework and the discussion. So it's and you can do that by essentially arguing against your own construct, a construct of your own creation. It's very, very disingenuous, and you'll see that a lot in like campaign ads. That's all their arguments are, and it's very, very irritating if you're trying to actually get anywhere.
No cap. This reminds me a lot of the if anybody here in the stream or you guys have played the first Red Dead Redemption, there was a mission in the game precisely about this, where a New York style snake oil salesman tries to get John Marston to help him out by selling snake oil at a local farm, and like does a bunch of stuff for it. So this is bringing back those sort of vibes.
Oh no, I can't wait to see. I can see. I didn't pause it here deliberately. It just kind of did that. The Jungle, Upton Sinclair. I sincerely hope he gets into this because oh my god, that is so freaking delicious. And the irony and the backstory behind that thing is just so unbelievable that I am just excited to get to this part. Anyways, I'm going to continue here unless anyone else has anything to say.
Oh, I'm good.
The Jungle exposed the meat industry for potentially selling human parts, while the Jungle Book enthralled us with the bear.
Oh my goodness, this person is absolutely trying to be deceptive at this point because the Jungle was a work of fiction. He made it up. Upton Sinclair spent maybe a few weeks at a meatpacking facility in order to do research for the book, but he never actually had any of these experiences, and there were no complaints about this happening at all. It was entirely made up specifically for the purposes of socialist propaganda. Yeah, that I see a whole lot of people being a bit surprised about this in the chat, and yeah, this thing it's fiction. Upton Sinclair even admitted in multiple occasions, as well as in private letters that were later recovered, like I think a few years ago, that this whole thing was a work of fiction and a work of propaganda in a specific attempt to basically put forth the message that corporation bad. Now, you want to hear the great irony about this? The jungle was actually used by the meatpacking facilities as justification for government certification of meatpacking facilities. The message that Upton Sinclair wanted to put forward is that the meatpacking companies don't care about their employees, that they allow them to be dismembered. But what actually ended up happening is people got shocked about that there might be human parts in their food. That, Soylent Green is made with people. That's what people were horrified by. And so what the meatpacking companies actually did is they went to the government, lobbied them to create government control and restrictions over their business, specifically to keep out competition. Because as I'm sure you're aware, especially around the progressive era, companies would go to the government, demand for or argue for regulation, as in ask for it specifically, so that they could afford it. They already had the resources and capital to be able to afford it, but they made up that loss easily by their competitors, their smaller, more nimble, and possible future competitors not being able to afford being in compliance with whatever regulations happen to be put forward. And as a result, well, it actually made them wealthier and more powerful, while at the same time causing the criticism against them, against any of the unsafe practices that may or may not have actually existed, to simply go away. After all, if you get some government bureaucrat to certify that this is safe, then it must be safe, right? Well, the companies were very smart in figuring out how to exploit this, and as a result, well, Upton Sinclair kind of got his comeuppance, but not in a good way, as he saw his work used to actually empower the very companies he was trying to criticize in the first place. So
I think he was a worker for the meatpacking industry in the first place. That was
no, he wasn't. He wasn't.
I thought he was.
No,
Okay.
he was only. Well, he did work there. He only worked for like a few weeks, and that was primarily to do research for the book. He was not. He was not a meatpacker. He was just someone who made up a complete work of fiction.
An advertising specialist gets called in by the meatpacking industry in order to quote unquote do research and put out a story which said meatpacking industry uses in order to try and shill for licensing schemes. But heretic corporations hate licensing. Burned off Sandler told me so.
Well, I mean, in that case, you really should look up history and who was actually lobbying for these regulations and controls. Hell, I mean, it was the big monopolies and the big trusts who were arguing for trust busting in the first place. Makes you really
Yeah,
question what their interests actually were, doesn't it?
I just looked
it's
up.
funny that Marxists, paint their entire position as any kind of study of history. Because if you look at history, even like if you even take like a basic glance at the history of licensing schemes in the United States, especially, but I'd imagine that this is probably true anywhere. Or just the incentives that corporations have, there's a very strong incentive associated with and a strong connection between licensing practices and corporations being very fond of them.
What's interesting that I noticed is that I looked it up on Wikipedia, and despite them being notorious for being negationists, they actually made mention that it was basically a propagandist publication, not like a real thing at all in their Wikipedia article, which is quite telling for real. Including the part where basically that it helped the big meat packers out in further centralizing the industry, even though many of the typical critics of this try to say, "Oh, it's used to oppose capitalism or markets."
It's not.
Yeah,
It's not. Sorry.
I'll admit that that's news to me, but it's not at all surprising because if you're even remotely intellectually honest about like the incentives of corporations in modernity, you would recognize that licensing schemes are basically just monopoly privilege by any other name. So if your argument is that government licensing is good, or you're arguing positively for that, well, and this was recognized back in the 19th century. I've talked about this before, how essentially the reason we associate market practices with monopoly is because of historical negationism following the antitrust acts, but also because of the perfect competition model, which is so inaccurate that even the school of thought that produced it, neoclassical school of thought, has had to essentially denounce it and say, yeah, this only works for thought experiments. This isn't intended to represent reality. But what were you gonna say, heretic?
Nothing. I was just going to remark that the perfect competition model, even when I was a know-nothing, didn't make any sense to me.
But yeah, this is a good case of why, as I've argued, the free market position should be regarded as radically opposed to what we have in modernity, and the idea that the free market position is even complementary to the idea of licensing schemes is purely just historical negationism, and also doesn't work from any sort of like ethical standpoint or analysis of actual market incentives.
If I were to give Knowledge Hub the benefit of the doubt, and I'm really reaching here, I would say that things about how the state was actually lobbied by big business in order to consolidate their market share through government regulation is relatively unknown to people who don't otherwise study who either don't extensively study history or are unfamiliar with historical revisionism, or at least libertarian historical revisionism. So I can at least understand where he's coming from if he takes the narrative put forward in the jungle and accepts it hook, line, and sinker. Although it is kind of funny to me that he completely misinterpreted what Upton Sinclair was trying to, or at least he missed. I shouldn't say he misinterpreted the book. He just didn't get the memo about what Upton Sinclair's actual intention with the book was when he said like, he exposed how meatpacking plants feed people human body parts when he was actually trying to make a fictional account to tug at people's heartstrings about worker exploitation.
Yeah,
So,
Heretic, I'm gonna go ahead and disagree with you. Based on that story you told me, I don't think Upton Sinclair was someone that even had that intention. I'm pretty sure he was an industry shill.
Most likely.
From everything I've seen and heard about Upton Sinclair, he was basically a Bolshevik who very much wanted to destroy private property, and he thought the best way to do that would be to go after big business. And from my understanding, he was, and this is not only coming from things that he publicly said, but also like private documents, things he would like letters he would write to his friends and family. He was absolutely appalled as to how, or he was not happy. I wouldn't say appalled, but he was not happy with how his book was being popularly interpreted. But he was appalled at how it was being used by big business to make them wealthier and more powerful. He was destroyed, or he was very much unhappy about that. Which I can understand why that would happen in the first place, because, well, communists not very smart.
Yeah. In either case, it's an amusing story and a great example for the Austro-libs to make their case with.
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
I guess we can continue.
Yep, let's keep going. Let me just open the thing.
Of smarts. And as we've seen since, regulations have become more standard, and nowadays it's a little bit harder to get away with these practices. We've seen supplements
I'm sorry, but do we need to go back to the beginning of the video? That grape juice that was advertised as pomegranate juice that was enabled by the state? You're saying it's a lot harder to get away with that kind of crap?
You started this fucking video by pointing to an example that happened pretty recently of something that no one would have been able to get away with even in late 19th century America. So, and as we've just spent quite a bit of time pointing out, licensing schemes only serve to make these corporate entities created by the state less accountable. And yes, created by the state, because corporate law is something that can only be enforced by the state. And the position that these entities have in the white market, in the political economy, are very much set up to make you more dependent upon political authorities or dependent upon third parties in order to have your income met. It makes you totally dependent upon someone sort of leveraging resources over you and giving you less ability to actually hold them accountable if they do something wrong. So that is absolutely not a construct of the market. Just to clarify, for anyone who may be new to that concept, that modernity is not something that the fact that we're associated with sort of what we have in modernity is kind of is state propaganda.
I'm sorry, were you finished?
Oh yeah, I'm done.
Yeah. I was just looking at the comments now, and I like what Isaac Clarke said. The government is God, and anything bad happens, it's the fault of Satan, the free market. I disagree because they have no ability to conceive of people being able to act independently of some kind of central arbiter controlling their behavior. So as a result, well, they'll replace the free market with capitalism, and that's probably what the term is for. With this in mind, you do see this quite a lot with Marxoids, where they have this impression in their minds that everything or every action and interaction in society is fundamentally a very black and white issue between government good and capitalism bad. What is capitalism? I don't know. I don't even know if they have a proper definition of government, so you're kind of just left to interpret what these definitions mean for yourself.
And that's something that I've noticed as well. I've noticed that underlying when statists are talking about free markets, it's always like a policy discussion to them. Like, what sort of things should the government do? Should they impose onto society that would like socially engineer society to have these incentives? Like, I think more than anything, considering the free market and capitalism to be one and the same thing, it's mostly a notion reinforced by the fact that a lot of statists literally do not conceivably understand the anti-political position.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and by the way, this is completely irrelevant, but I sent you something that Azure sent to me in DMs. I think you'd find it hilarious. I'm not going to show it on stream because honestly, it's the kind of thing that would probably get the stream kicked out. But yeah, I think you'll find it funny.
I just looked at it. Yeah, I'm really glad you didn't show that. Now everybody in the chat's gonna be like, "What the fuck was it?" It was something that it was something really racist.
Yeah,
Wait, where's it posted at?
I posted it in SO's DMs. He can probably show you. Actually, I can probably just straight up show it to you in DMs as well.
Yes.
All right, there we go.
As far as your point earlier, Filthy, I mean, capitalism is everything we don't like, even if it's something that state socialism did and messed up really bad. Whoa, that's spicy. That's very spicy.
Yeah, and apparently that's completely real. It strikes me as one of those examples of people who just write down something without really understanding what it means or how it could be interpreted. Maybe because they're kind of just lazy or they're mentally clocked out, and so you kind of just have someone they have their boss tell them to do something, and they're just like, okay, and then they just do it.
I'm not gonna say what it is, but this is gonna drive the chat crazy. So there's like a billboard, and no, I'm not saying what's on it, but it's sort of unfortunate phrasing, and it features a marketing term and the use of a either ethnic or reference to national identity based on how you interpret it. So it implies that they're selling people of that identity.
I'm not going to reveal what it says either, but the fact that it says used doesn't mean that the topic in question depreciates like a car. That's kind of what I'm getting at. It sounds really, really kind of weird. X person is depreciating in value like a car. It's just like, what? That's woo, spicy as heck.
Just give me a second here. I'm somewhere else. All right, now let's keep going.
All right.
That claim to stop the cold and the flu, and Volkswagen finding out that it ain't easy being greensy. Kellogg's claims cereal makes you immortal and stops you from masturbating. But this isn't a...
Wait, what?
I
want to try this cereal. Christians must love this cereal.
I think that's a reference to the founder of Kellogg's, who had fruity beliefs, but I don't think that wasn't false advertising. That was just him being like a weird religious fanatic.
As for Jesus flakes,
I know. Sorry.
As for the other examples, do you guys know what he's referencing? Because he kind of brushed past the other examples, in a Gish Gallopy fashion, but he didn't even mention what he was talking about.
I know that there was some controversy a couple years back about Volkswagen failing some or meeting some government green standards, but there was a bunch of controversy about that. Mainly that the standards that were used were very ridiculous, and therefore, when Volkswagen was claiming that what they were doing was environmentally friendly, they decided to throw a lawsuit against him for false advertising. But I mean, it's kind of hilarious in the sense that he made the earlier case that it's hard to get away with false advertising now, and then lists several contemporary examples of alleged false
Thank you so
advertising.
much, Filthy and ESO,
Wait,
for
stop.
these streams. Ever think about
We
donation
got
stretch goals? Maybe
donation.
camp video production or certain video topics like revisiting the tutorial
How
on
much
how to
is it?
live
Who's it from?
counter-economically or advice for new agorist content creators.
I can't explain what it was in the meantime.
Yeah, that's the problem is that only I can hear it. Well, me and the chat, but it's from Heat Bombastic. He donated $10. Thank you very much. What he said was, "Thank you so much, Filthy and Esso, for these streams. Ever think about donation stretch goals? Maybe to amp video production or certain video topics like revisiting the tutorial on how to live counter-economically or advice for new content creators?"
Oh yeah, for sure. It's greatly appreciated, but yeah, because I'm living counter economically, the any donations greatly appreciated. That's basically my savings. What I get from the donations, and I'd imagine that it helps Heretic out quite a bit as well. But I mean, yeah, it does help out with the production of content because it allows me to dedicate more time to actually making content and not having to stress about looking for materials. But yeah. Do you have anything to say?
I mean, I've thought about doing stretch goals and stuff like that, but honestly, I'm at a loss as to what we would do that for, because I'm going to be completely honest, there isn't very much in the way of content that I could create that really has much of a price barrier. So in a way, I kind of feel like I'd be holding content hostage, if you know what I mean.
I actually do have a coherent thing I would want to create a stretch goal for. I've been flirting with the idea of like creating a sort of like green screen setup that I could make videos much easier with, but before I do that, I want to make like a protogen helmet so that I'd be able to be the protogen counterpart in my like live action videos.
All right.
I mean, I like the idea of doing like videos explaining economics, and frankly, Esso and I know a person that could possibly help us out a lot with that video.
Well, I mean, we can definitely do that. There's a bunch of things we can do. I imagine that the protogen helmet would be fairly pricey, though. Not to mention that in order to get like the really like high-tech electronic ones with the LEDs that can actually change facial expressions, you'll either need to find someone who's particularly good with electronics, or be able to find someone who does and then buy it off of them directly, which I imagine will probably set you back $1 or $2 grand.
I've looked around, and you can find like the files online to do that. It's open source. All you need is a Raspberry Pi. But yeah, it's definitely an expense for sure. But like the one that I would be going for is the one that like has the changing LED emotions, but also its mouth syncs with yours, so it's kind of like a cartoon character, but it's live action. So it would be different from anything anybody else has done.
Oh yeah.
Oh, is it like those helmets on like Watch Dogs 2? That one guy freaking has it like over his eyes. And
I'll show you after this. I'll show you after the stream.
Cool.
I didn't know that they were able to move their mouths now, or in sync with yours. But anyways, yeah, let's keep going.
Video that lists all the false ad falsenesses, but instead I kind of just wanted to talk about a specific market that the law has not caught up with in this advertising game.
So now he was pointing out how difficult it is and how great it is for the government to stop false advertising, but then goes into how there's a lot of false advertising still today. It's almost as if he's saying two completely different things at once. I mean, at this point, I think it's very clear to both myself, Esso, and our audience that this person is not just ignorant. They're deliberately trying to deceive us.
I said it from the beginning. One of the reasons why, if I were to create a tier list of the BreadTube channels, people like this guy would like be dead last. Maybe people like Vicky 1999 would be, or Spooky Scary Socialist would be under them, but no, the reason that I particularly despise these people is because they just outright lie and don't give a shit. That literally all that they care about is whether or not their content pushes you closer towards being a Marxist. And that I find that just so despicable, that I have absolutely nothing good to say about these people.
It's the whole problem with deception is that you're deliberately trying to manipulate people into, well, I mean, there's nothing really good to say about deception that people don't already know, but you're pushing people towards an opinion they wouldn't otherwise already hold if you weren't already going out of your way to, trick them. In a way, this video is actually particularly hypocritical in the sense that he accuses other people of trying to be deceptive in their advertising, while himself using deception in his advertising of his ideas.
Yeah, and that's sort of the irony that I was hinting at earlier is this is a video using deceptive practices and false and manipulative advertising techniques, talking about false advertising in corporate political economies.
Give me a second here. I'm somewhere else right now. So I think that's all we have to say for the moment. Should we continue?
Sure, but this is probably where it gets really bad. Like Heretic and I haven't seen the video yet. Genuinely this time, like I mentioned at the start of the stream, I just woke up like 15 minutes ago. But yeah, let's continue. I'm sure I'll regret that though.
Be computer technology. Yeah, misleading ads in this market is a day-to-day thing, and they can get away with it too, because, well, lawmakers don't know too much about the stuff. What's a RAM? How can JPEG...
Kidding me? No, they literally... Silicon Valley, and this is... James Corbett has a pretty good documentary about this that you could find. Silicon Valley, as we know it, literally is the product of a project started by the U.S. government in World War II, intended for mass propaganda. It's true. A lot of. I'm not suggesting. Oh, the government created all this technology. No. We have an entire video sort of debunking the Al Gore created the internet myth, but no, like the structure of these firms and how they sort of dynamically function in the current political economy, that is entirely a construct of the state, and the state knows. What were you going to say?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to go on to Google specifically because I did research for and made a video about them and how they are clearly not a free market entity in any sense of the word. In fact, I would go so far as to say that they're a government agency. Their founders were funded by CIA venture capital group COINTEL or InQtel. I keep getting those two confused. What they did then is they gave them infusions of hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars, as well as access to expertise engineers who helped them design the search engine algorithm that would form the basis of Google. And it goes without saying that since they were founded as a company, they've been receiving government favoritism, government favors, and government subsidies basically the entirety of their existence up until today. Not to mention that their management is basically a revolving door between the state, regulatory agencies, and even a few congressional staffers, as well, moving back and forth between Google executive and management and, well, the state, as I said earlier. It is very much a government agency. The state says jump, and they don't even need to ask how high, because the person who gave the order was previously their chief marketing officer. So they already know how high to jump.
I mean, if anything, tech firms are probably more closely associated to the government than the fossil fuel industry or these like big pharma corporations. Because if like software engineering were allowed to be completely, like, if the government had absolutely no hand in it, and it would have destroyed the state's ability to function decades ago, because it would have made it so the state had absolutely no ability to control communication, and therefore it would have made it so commerce would have been impossible for the state to have any ability to consistently manipulate or to control. And as a result, the state if had that been the case, I guess you could my alt future hypothesis is that we probably, like, for at least a couple years now, would be in a functionally stateless society. But it's my point is that the idea that the government he's insinuating essentially, he's using weasel words, but the insinuation is that there's absolutely no regulation, no government intervention in these tech corporations. Note that he said his specific claim was tech regulations haven't caught up to the tech industry, which is it's essentially a way to articulate that point, but to be vague enough that if he gets called on it, he could say, "Oh, I didn't say that. I was attempting to." Yeah, you're familiar with that tactic, but that is just so laughably absurd, even on its face, that I can't believe anyone takes this seriously.
I can't believe anyone takes this channel seriously.
I mean, aside from just what we mentioned earlier, the same licensing schemes apply to tech firms. The same, like, antitrust, whatever, false advertising laws, and the FTC is set up specifically to try and mess with the conduct of tech firms even before the internet was a thing. The FTC was set up for, like, internet and radio. Because, again, if communication is decentralized, the state is done.
It's over. And they have, as we've explained, they very much have a reason to do this. And even from the very beginning, like, the internet was designed as part of DARPA's ARPANET project. It was only when it got out of the government that it really started to, explode in popularity. And even then, like, the government has had its fingers inside the internet and its development for a very long time. Like, I know that the NSA, for example, in the 80s actually was very involved in making sure research into encrypting transmissions and cryptography, that those papers that were published never saw the light of day, because according to them, it was a threat to national security. You had people who were trying to figure out, like, the original design of internet connection was that it was supposed to be end-to-end encrypted. The problem that they were having was that encryption is very resource intensive, and they were trying to figure out a way to get around that. And any progress that was made towards developing that goal was directly suppressed by the NSA, who claimed national security reasons. Which, of course, we all know that national security is just a euphemism for in the interest of the ruling class.
And he mentioned that, the reason this is the case is politicians aren't tech savvy. Well, first of all, that's a broad generalization I don't think is very fair to make. If you look at the way that a lot of politicians use social media, or the way that they suggest the algorithms functions, it's very clear that some of them, at the very least, are familiar. But The fact of the matter is that they're not the ones doing the legwork. It's their armies of people working for people like the working for organizations like the NSA or DARPA or even the cyber intelligence arm of the CIA or the Federal Trade Commission or all these other branches that are set up specifically to try and specialize with that sort of resource. So to suggest that the government is just powerless, even if they wanted to, no. Not only is that not the case, but the structure of the internet itself has been largely influenced by the government suppressing innovations that would have caused it to develop in an entirely different direction, which is what we pointed out in our video. And Heretic and I disagree as to whether or not ARPANET was the beginning of the internet. The very first network algorithms were not created by the government. They were developed through private funding. So I guess that's a point where we disagree. But
I mean, I define the internet as a network of networks, and ARPANET was the first one to really get into that seriously, at least as far as I'm aware. There might be new information that I'm not aware of, but yeah. Anyway, should we continue the video, or do you have more to say?
no, I'm good.
The governing bodies and the mass public aren't too informed on technical details. You get a lot of iffy advertising tactics. One such is the all too common buzzword. You've seen this many a time, I'm sure. This phone camera has 50 megapixels, so it has to be better than that lousy 12, right? Wrong.
I mean, the state's notable for using buzzwords and also to shield their time. I mean, that's the whole spiel of the Mockingbird media, for real. So why are you throwing this more advertisers than the state?
I mean, he's demonstrating exactly what we're talking about, where they just throw out random buzzwords in order to try to confuse people, try and make people think and believe in certain things. Yeah, we've all seen the 80 megapixels, all of the random techno babble that they throw around and try to make themselves sound smarter than they actually are. However, we also see this guy going around with things like, oh, it's just capitalism, and also throwing around random images that are all thrown in front of very funky filters to make them look very strange. And the whole imagery, I was thinking about this before I even paused the video, that it looks like he is specifically trying to disorient us, trying to throw us off balance by just like an eclectic, very like almost seizure-inducing imagery. Like honestly, my eyes are starting to hurt just watching the video.
Yeah, I could sort of see what you're saying, and the thing that's actually a very common aesthetic choice in a lot of these BreadTube channels. So that especially the ones which are supposed to be imitations of other types of content on YouTube. So that's an interesting thing to note. But I don't know. I guess we could continue unless you had anything else to say.
I was just going to add that I get that you want to show small 1 to 3 second clips of certain imagery related to what you're talking about, and I understand like that a lot of work to put into it. It also makes your video a lot more stimulating to watch, and is thus going to be better for things like audience retention. However, I can't help but think that there is a deliberate choice in the way that they set up their videos, because it does look disorienting and very seizure-inducing, and I'm absolutely certain that they are trying to manipulate us through sound, through imagery, through all sorts of things. We talked about how early in the video, like with Minute Maid, it was, or that Minute Maid thing, like, they did that specifically to annoy us, to get us to be annoyed at Minute Maid. And I can't help but think like they're disorienting us for some other purpose that I'm not entirely clear on at the moment.
And just another thing that I was going to add, I guess, is, if his complaint is the average person doesn't understand software engineering or just the technical aspect of coding, Well, you know what would significantly help that? Get the fucking state out of education.
I mean,
That itself would significantly lower the barrier to entry for a lot of these highly specialized fields, because as Heretic and I have in countless videos gone on to point out, state education is based fundamentally and intrinsically upon a specific model of education known as the Prussian model. And the Prussian model is specifically intended to make it so you're incapable of critically thinking outside of what the authority figure in the school is teaching you. It makes, like, they teach you in a way so you're not understanding technically what is being presented to you, but instead you're given a set of problems and you have to just memorize what the authority figure, the teacher, told you. It makes people fundamentally dependent, but it also stunts their technical abilities in a way that we really don't have any precedent for, because as long as state education has existed, this has been slowly happening. So, and the result is for a lot of these industries, like a modern version of the dynamic between the academics and the population prior to the invention of the printing press has been created, where essentially people have a lot of people have absolutely no basis in judging whether or not something is true by just listening to what's being told to them. They have to listen to scientists, quote unquote, who give their consensus, and that's what you're supposed to use to determine whether what's true or not.
the way that government schools are structured is that you rely on a authority figure who is just an authority figure as the basis for determining what is right and what is wrong. And as such, it becomes very easy for advertisers to exploit this, and I'm just trying to present this from the perspective that Knowledge Hub is going to would probably find appealing, in that if someone can just look important, look smart enough, then suddenly it can become very, well, easy for them to appeal to people and foster in the dependence that they have towards authority figures. Perhaps a good example of this would be this classic advertisement I believe Marlboro cigarettes used to do, where they said like 4 out of 5 doctors prefer Marlboro, and that was a thing that they did to try to counter the narrative that was starting to be pushed to the media that cigarettes were unhealthy. Now, of course, I don't recommend smoking at all. That's just something I personally find disgusting. I don't personally do, and I would recommend against people doing that, because there is quite a bit of merit to the claim that smoking is detrimental to people's health. But you can imagine that, oh, well, 4 out of 5 doctors prefer this cigarette. That must mean it's perfectly fine and healthy. But I mean, this also brings up another point, namely that if government schools are so ill-equipped to teach people to be able to understand what their own interests are and to be able to critically examine information, then what makes them useful at all? Since the same consumers were presumably educated in government schools. So aren't you admitting unintentionally that government schools are incompetent to teach kids? Hello?
Yeah, I don't have anything to say to that.
All right, yeah, you're probably just waiting for me to start
Neither
again.
do I.
So anyways,
Yeah.
continuing.
You got sensors and AI and other shit that you can't convey in a simple ad. So this picture might look better than this picture, but this phone got a bigger number. Same thing with the teraflop, a term that sees a lot of use today compared.
I've never heard of a teraflop.
The fuck is a teraflop?
I guess there are articles being written about it, but I mean, he kind of just, blew his own argument the fuck out, because mean, if a big part of the reason why this information can't be conveyed is because it's very complex and requires a lot of baggage to be unpacked, then you really, in a simple advertisement, wouldn't conceivably be able to explain that. So the lying by omission argument goes right out the window.
All right, I'm looking up teraflops right now. They represent the capacity for a processor to calculate 1 trillion floating bit operations per second. So it's supposed to be something similar to like gigahertz for processors, but different. I'm not entirely sure how, and honestly, I'd have to read more because this is honestly the first time I've heard about it. So, yeah.
Given that it's being mentioned in the context of false advertising, I am pretty sure that this is going to be a nuclear take.
Probably, if I'm going to hazard a guess, I'm going to assume that he's just going to fly right by it and not even talk about it. Anyways, continuing.
Compared to back in the time when they didn't say teraflop. It describes peak graphical performance. So if this is a 6 teraflop GPU, it must be as good as this 6 teraflop GPU, right? Again, no. Companies use different architectures and optimizations, so the only thing you can go off of is real-world performance. Probably a more common one you've encountered is resolution, marketing a TV as a basic 4K, 8K, OK TV. Sure, it tells you how many little dots you might get, but less people are concerned about the nits, which is the brightness level, the contrast, whether it's OLED, the refresh rate, latency, viewing angles. And that's why a 4K TV could cost either $200 or $2,000. Because Mr. Man over there going into Walmart on clearance day doesn't know that this thing's a piece of shit. It gets more confusing when you combine the resolution and the video games. Will the next Xbox have 8K? No.
He once again acts as though both as a consumer is stupid, doesn't do any research himself, and that just basically you're a mindless sheep who consume and nothing but. And the resolution is a big deal.
Yeah, there's the arrogance that a lot of these Marxist arguments have, where I guess this is the working class quote unquote equivalent of dear poor helpless stupid brown person, I'm here to save you from all these superior white people.
I mean, sorry.
Because that's literally what this is. It's you poor people are too stupid to do anything by themselves. So we need the strong man, totally not getting any fashy vibes, by the way, to come in and to protect them.
Mm-hmm. This is something that I've seen from Marxoids quite a lot, that they just assume that people are mindless automatons. Now, I can get what they're coming from. I'm pretty sure you've encountered the kind of material I forget what the term that they use for it. It's like material as a material. Dialectic. No, not the dialectic. It's referring to material determinism, where they argue that if you're born poor, you're going to stay poor, and that there is nothing you can do to really get out of that in any significant or effective way. And every person that is able to leave the bourgeois into the proletariat, or the proletariat into the bourgeois, are basically just fringe examples that don't really mean anything, or at the very least token examples. So
the fact that they can exist kind of refutes that entire argument that it's an axiom.
Yeah, but their argument putting forward is that you are effectively a mindless slave who is just a pale reflection in a mirror cast by your material circumstances, and as such you have no free will or agency of your own. And so if you assume that people are just mindless reflections of their circumstances, much like a ball being placed on a slope is going to roll down a hill, you're going to effectively buy whatever advertisements are placed in front of you, and are thus just going to just mindlessly consume. So from the Marxian standpoint, why they would assume that people would just mindlessly buy things makes perfect sense. I mean, chances are that they themselves don't really know anybody with an IQ above room temperature, so their own personal experiences probably do affirm this. However, it is very much a huge assumption that they have failed to explain, not to mention that it flies in the face of even basic observable reality, as well as the various examples that even they will put forward about how advertising is mind control, about how there's this massive multi-billion-dollar industry, not just in advertising, but in trying to figure out how advertising works, how to stand out, how to persuade people. Which, honestly, if you could just put an advertisement in front of someone's face and they'll go along and do whatever you want, but or do whatever the advertiser says, then you don't really need to put that much effort into trying to make it stand out, make it persuasive. You just need to put forward a sign with a message written in Comic Sans saying whatever the hell you want, and people just mindlessly obey it. But I mean, this isn't the first time that they shoot themselves in the foot. But this is exactly what I'm talking about when I made the stream title "Advertising Equals Mind Control," because they earnestly do believe this, that people are just going to mindlessly buy whatever flashy advertisement is put in front of their face. When, quite frankly, like how many advertisements have you seen just in the last, I wouldn't say in the last hour, because I imagine a good chunk of you have been watching the stream for the last hour. How many advertisements have you seen just today? And how many of those products that were advertised to you did you actually buy? How many of you can actually recall the last 5 ads that you saw? The last 1 ad, even?
And so this is actually sort of the basis of a lot of their arguments, but it's they refer to it more commonly as operant conditioning. And they refer to it as operant conditioning because when you just explain sort of what the basis of what they actually believe is, it's one of those situations where what they actually believe reveals itself to be an absurdity if it's actually explained in a naked manner. But so the basic problems with really any deterministic view are, well, I would say the two best arguments. The problem fundamentally at its core, though, is that it's not a falsifiable argument. So by default, it can't be scientific because if it's not falsifiable, then it doesn't explain anything because nothing would have because it doesn't since nothing would ever be able count against it, there would be no basis in demonstrating anything because you're not demonstrating anything is wrong or that anything is true. You could just say that it means anything, or you could say it's a counter to everything. But so the two, aside from that, we actually, as a sapient species, have a large degree of autonomy over how our thought process is formed and even how our brain develops. Because the way that thought patterns and sort of philosophical frameworks greatly influence how your neural networks form. That's a phenomenon known as neuroplasticity, and that goes on to influence the chemistry in your body, which can influence can influence how your body develops. So there's the fact that literally in an abstract sense, you can kind of you can will yourself to develop in a certain direction, to make yourself smarter, to make yourself more perceptive. But also, there's quantum indeterminacy where, particles on a subatomic level don't have any determined pattern of movement. So whether or not we're talking about this from in a spatial sense or just in an existential sense, there's no case for determinism.
There really isn't, but that won't stop them from trying to make that case any other else or in any other way. And this kind of idea that people are just going to mindlessly go along with advertisements is exactly the kind of nonsense that comes about when you reject the free will hypothesis. Or I should really just say the free will theory,
But to
because
clarify,
I think we're
I'm
past the
not.
point of hypothesis.
To clarify, I'm not trying to promote Buckleyite pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of position, because I actually have an entire video refuting the concept of meritocracy for anybody who's interested on the Backalley Philosophy channel. But because in many ways in current state society, unless you go out of your way to obtain some sort of political privilege for yourself, like a license, or to be given a grant of a patent grant, there's no way to actually succeed. So in the current society, even if you were to assume the meritocracy thesis, it's not true. You can't do that in the current society, because what actually determines success is essentially how much political clout somebody has with the state. But
Yeah, should we continue?
sure.
Oh, cards that are out right now for way more than this thing will cost, that are way more powerful than this thing is, cannot run it. At least for big games. Maybe Feeding Frenzy will work on it. And that gives us the biggest issue of false advertising here. The public just doesn't know any better.
Yep. What did I just say? What I just said
Yeah.
before that is like, yeah, literally, he literally says, "Oh, the public doesn't know any better. You just mindless sheep automatons over here that can't deny the propaganda or the consumerism."
People don't know any better, which is why the government made of people knows better.
Which is why I, Knowledge Hub, know better.
Which is why I'm able to explain this.
This
It's such an absurd argument, because no matter the context, it's kind of self-defeating. Because if you can obtain that kind, it is obviously not impossible to obtain what conscious knowledge of whatever position you're trying to articulate, even assuming that it's true, because you're doing so by making that argument. Are you saying that you're an exception? That argument sort of inherently implies like the existence of supernatural abilities, and this is why a lot of people say statism is a religion.
This is why the first words I said on my channel in the first video were statism is a religion, because you end up with these kind of ridiculous ideas that only make sense from a supernatural standpoint, to say nothing of the fact that they fall off the idea that they are even a remotely scientific principle, and just end up being just vague appeal to something that can only be described as a dogma.
This is sort of something that I was talking with you about in DMs, but something, and I've mentioned this a lot in the videos on the channel as well, but he's talking very much as though he sees himself inside of the bus looking out at the people in the city around him, and that's essentially the mentality which drives statism. Like they think of themselves as the beneficiaries of whatever the state is going to do, and they think of themselves as the enlightened rationalists who are just going to talk down to all the plebeians who are basically just subhuman monkeys that don't know any better. It's a very sick mentality at its core, and I don't think that a lot of people are like Knowledge Hub. I think that a lot of people kind of get themselves into that way of thinking because of government education and because of these sort of social structures that are enforced by the state's manipulations of society. But in this case, I can't see it as any, considering how many times he's had to lie outright in this video, I can't see any other possibility, then it's just somebody who is being consciously malicious.
I mean, that's the only explanation I can really think of. And we knew pretty much right away that this person was deliberately trying to deceive us. And now you can see that now that we're fully confused, we're fully annoyed, we're fully manipulated by their use of imagery, their use of music, specifically to provoke certain emotions in us. He's now going to tell us about how people are horrible, dumb, stupid, but other people who call themselves rulers or politicians or bureaucrats or Congress
or
people.
Tyler from Knowledge Hub.
Well, you see, Tyler imagines himself being in the ruling class in the future. That's why they do this, because they see themselves as the national aristocracy in the coming new world order or new national order, or whatever it is.
Speaking of which, that Hoppa video, that the very last part of the essay is done, and Heretic's in the process of editing it, so that should be up in the next couple days. Why I say speaking of which in that case is because there's going to be some spicy takes in there, to say the least.
Yeah, they're going to lose their minds. Anyways, yeah, I only mentioned national aristocracy because it's another good example of how authoritarian collectivists always believe that they will be in the ruling class in the future. Now, how many of them actually would be in the ruling class if they get their way? I could tell you none of them. It's going to be the ruthless sociopaths who end up being in the ruling class because the state naturally selects for ruthless sociopaths.
Also, did you catch a moment ago how he essentially implied that value is intrinsic?
I think I missed that, actually.
Because he was talking about the market price of graphics cards, and then he said, that's way more than they would cost.
Let me have a look at that, actually. I'm back. I'm going to backtrack. It's
Advertising here. Advertising here.
it's
is it backtracking?
I don't. It's
Advertising here. The public
it's not letting me
doesn't know any
backtrack.
better.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, let me try.
Oh,
No, we got to go
Advertising
back
here.
a little bit. That's not far enough.
let's try back here.
I think this is about it. You good?
It's not loading on my screen.
The public.
That's 447.
The public
Video.
It's not at 447 for me.
Okay.
It's rubber banding back to 457.
Try reloading.
But it's gonna be fine. I remember when they said that. But anyways, yeah, let's just keep going.
Well, just what I was going to say about that is that's a great example of another great example, I guess, of Marxist concepts being insinuated without actually being justified or demonstrated. Now, there's actually a shred of basis for this claim that copyright law and corporate globalization, creating essentially cartels over the distribution of the minerals used to create the technology that we use, ends up causing these products to become artificially scarce. And that ends up resulting in their market prices skyrocketing. But it is not. Oh well, they just think that they could pull that. People in the market just think they could pull a fast one on you, and like that's the opposite of how it works. Things don't get more expensive. Things become more valuable, and costs go down because of cooperation and innovation.
The guy wants to pretend that supply and demand doesn't exist.
Didn't outright argue that or attempt to insinuate that, but that's what his argument would imply for sure.
Oh yeah, that things are just expensive because they're just expensive for arbitrary reasons, and they're not trying to meet, and that the company that makes them is not trying to meet some kind of market demand based on price signals that they have received in the past. Now, granted, their understanding of price signals may not always be accurate, but it's still going to be more accurate than some arbitrary number decided by a government commissar.
Heretic, what about aggregate demands?
What about aggregate demand?
It doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Made up.
How do you objectively value the labor of every single worker? Said by Isaac Clarke.
You create a
Do you-
totally not a state trademark, a worker council to do it for you. That's objectively proven because of my reasons.
Pretty much. And I like what Kajoltad said. Look at these people, glassy-eyed automatons going about their daily lives, never stopping to look around and think. I'm the only conscious human in a world of sheep. I'm sure
Which
every.
is,
Sorry?
that is ironically the NPC mentality.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure every single person that they've ever seen and they think is a glassy-eyed automaton, I'm sure they all think the same way. Which I can't say I blame them for, because most of the people you've never met, you don't know what their actual thoughts, their dreams, their ambitions, their anxieties. You don't know anything about them, so it's very easy to just dismiss them as someone who isn't like relatively aware. Most of them are just trying to go about their daily lives without causing trouble, so naturally they come off as, well, sheep, people who are part of a herd. They don't really stand out in any significant way, so it's really hard for them to express any sort of individuality, any preferences that they might actually hold, especially
Yeah,
considering how centralized society is.
I wouldn't say that all of them are just like him. I would say that because I would say that a lot more of them don't have this mentality where they're the only sentient being on Earth. Because of that, I'd say a lot of these people he looks at as glassy-eyed automatons in his everyday life are probably a lot more perceptive than he is and are a lot more intelligent.
And to be fair, that's not a very high mark to reach. But then again, I can't imagine that a day doesn't go by where he just envisions himself or daydreams himself ruling over these people.
I don't know. I wouldn't say that Tyler is stupid because he's able to utilize all of these extremely manipulative advertising techniques. But if he genuinely believes this crap, he's stupid. I think that the mentality a lot of these Marxists have it's essentially the ends justify the means.
Well, we know it
And
is. They outright tell us this, including in their user manual. I don't know if you've read Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky.
I'm loosely familiar, at least with the 9 rules.
Yeah, part of his thing is that, yeah, the ends justify the means. That's probably the most important thing that he says. So yeah, the user manual of Marxist ideologues literally tells us this, that they do believe that the ends justify the means.
And, you know, as Heretic and I have demonstrated, that's incoherent. The ends don't exist unless the means can actually be shown to actually arrive at those ends. And Roderick Long has a good presentation about this. Rothbard's Left and Right, 40 years later, on YouTube. Anyone who's interested can find it, where he essentially explains that how like modern state socialism, how the current political dichotomy came into being, was largely because the people in the 19th century who thought of themselves as, you know, socialists, but were actually free market radicals because socialism meant something entirely different at the time. They started to get won over by shills in the state, suggesting that policies implemented by the state could arrive at these anti-big business goals and subvert by essentially reformism. Oh, the state's gonna come in and reform the old world monopoly system created by feudalism. And what were you gonna say?
Nothing.
Oh, but yeah, like if you look at the history of Marxism or related ideas, and the fascists were Mussolini, quite famously, was very had very high praise for relativistic ideas. Just if you look at the connection between the association of the state and influence over society as a decentralizing force, it's entirely based in relativism, or like German idealism, or all these or consequentialism, utilitarianism, basically all of these frameworks which look at conclusions as though they're equal to every other part of a line of reasoning, as if they're coherent sort of in and of themselves. And it doesn't matter how you reach that conclusion. Just if you reach that conclusion, it's valid. And that's the problem, is you can't reach that conclusion unless you're using means that can be shown that to arrive at that conclusion, which is why I was talking about earlier in the server that I find nihilism to be one of the most destructive things, one of the most destructive influences, not just in philosophy, not just in libertarianism, but in philosophy in general.
Mm-hmm. At some point, I think you and I have got to do an exhaustive essay exploring nihilism and refuting all of its precepts, largely or at the same scale of the Hoppian video. It probably won't be as long because, let's be honest, nihilism is kind of boring and repetitive, and not nearly as...
There's not really a whole lot to go over. I'm sure that the only real point of contention would just be why I'm treating idealism and relativism as if they're the same thing. And I do that because fundamentally they argue the exact same way. They look at conclusions the same way, and just like one another, they have no base for actually explaining their conclusions.
Mhm.
So I see them functionally as the same thing.
All right, well, anyways, let's continue.
Advertising here. The public just doesn't know any better.
Now, this is the big one, I guess, because it's taken a minute and he didn't even actually record dialogue for this section.
I mean, basically, to put simply, this. Go ahead, sorry.
But I don't understand sort of like what is unique about this particular claim that hasn't already been refuted previously. I mean, if you want to get into the if you want to get to the technical aspects of this, I mean, technically hardware it's not irrelevant, but the only factor that really matters in terms of performance is optimization. So to say that the PS5 or the PC runs faster than the other it's just a question of how you optimize your hardware, and it's that's not false advertising. It's just that framework is marketing.
Other than what I've seen here, what we've refuted already, really what hits home for me at this point is that I think maybe he's trying to say, oh, well, look at these. For example, they mention like different the Unreal Engine, different. Oh, I know they talk about the demos usually because there's a big thing, of course, with AAA games where they say, oh, well, the demo looks so good, and then you get the actual game and it's absolute dog shit. Or, for example, a big one. This was Fallout 76. Of course, that one has a whole giant thing, not just that. But I mean, to put it in perspective again, there's something that he's trying to claim as a product of the market that's a product of the state, and that's IP. I mean, pretty much all the problems that really
it's not
exist
just
right
that.
now. Well, it's not just that, but the main when you talk about my graphics issues and all these bugs and stuff like that fixes it that need fixing, and how Bethesda or Rockstar or Activision or whoever the Blizzard, whoever the fuck making these games isn't updating it or producing a bad product. The problem is that to get rid of that, open source your fucking games. More people would love to be able to and create a better product doing that.
Just what I was going to say though is that a big part of what's actually kept optimization in this state, where the only way effectively to optimize your hardware for new software that comes out is the so-called right to repair laws, which make it basically illegal for people to modify their own devices. That only the manufacturer can modify those devices because something IP claim.
Mm-hmm.
And even aside from that, a lot of these corporations like Microsoft or Apple that have essentially been built up by state protection, like a big thing stopping people from optimizing their software to make it so that they can actually, to optimize their hardware so that their software can run more efficiently, has been the absolutely toxic way that these mainstream operating systems have been designed, where it's just near impossible to actually get into the layout of your desktop, or to change the refresh rate and all these other technical factors that would help with performance. Microsoft particularly is notorious for this, where after every update, if you do there's a code that you could type into your command prompt, which you can find pretty easily online, that would essentially give you access to the Microsoft Dev Kit, like the control panel that the developers have. They can't take that out of their releases, so every release of a Windows OS has that in it. But if you change any aspect of your operating system to make it run more efficiently after every Windows update, which is manual, that's something you can't. Not manual. It's necessary. It's not something you can do anything about. After every Windows update, it reverts all the settings back to the default. So it's a massive pain in the ass, and a lot of people just don't do it, even though it's entirely possible. It would be entirely possible to run Doom Eternal on a graphics card that came out in 2005 at 60 frames per second. The reason that people don't do that, though, is largely because of said optimization.
Basically, what happens is that you have these operating systems that are just bloatware. It's just full of this proprietary crap that not only does not work and you will never use in terms of programs, apps that are added by default, but also includes a lot of processes, subroutines, and even like operating systems within operating systems that literally do nothing except make your computer less secure and give backdoor access to groups like the NSA. You get rid of crap like this, and if people were actually able to control what actually goes into their computers programming wise, as opposed to relying on these huge proprietary firms to just make it for them, then you would see just an absolute renaissance in terms of computer optimization that would be able to make modern day gaming computers just be absolutely phenomenally powerful. Just forget about running Doom Eternal. Imagine running Doom Eternal on max settings 20 times simultaneously, all at 60 FPS. That's probably what they'd be able to do
Or
at the minimum.
like 300 FPS, but what I was going to say is if you got the state out of that market, or if you open sourced a lot of development, these problems would go away near instantaneously.
All
So
right.
that's all.
Yeah, all right. Anyways, continuing.
And that's also pretty irritating. The way that this is being framed is like, if you disagree with him, then you have to defend the marketers or the advertising techniques. Well, no, obviously, Heretic and I don't do that. We don't defend these corporate practices, and we don't defend manipulative advertising techniques. Just to clarify, what our actual position is and what the actual argument is what's the source of the problem. And it's not a lack of government intervention. It's actually the opposite.
I mean, pretty much that's what I mentioned as well.
All right, I guess we can continue.
Sorry, I'm just busy thinking elsewhere. I mean, I don't even know what the point that they're trying to put forward is. It undermines their earlier point when they said that, oh, government regulation has or has made false advertising hard to get away with. When here, like, they're trying to show examples of advertising that's false, but they're not even showing advertising. They're just showing news articles. You're basically shifting your goalpost by saying that, oh, news articles should be regulated because sometimes people make claims about their tech or their stuff that is ridiculously hyperbolic. Which, I mean, like, I know that they definitely want censorship in information and news, but I mean, it's just like, and I'm pretty sure he does realize that he's being deliberately deceptive at this point. I wouldn't be surprised. Anyways, continuing.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it is up to the consumer and the shareholder to just know what they're getting into. Expect marketing to try to sell you on a product. That's how it works. But as bad as all this might be, it's nothing compared to pomegranate blueberry juice. This is Tyler of Knowledge Hub.
And that was the end of the video.
This is a very depressing end screen because it means more than one person are actually giving money to this cretin.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, what do you even say about this?
It doesn't surprise me at all, considering that his content as well as the content of other people in his community gets significantly promoted in the algorithms more than anybody else's content. That's another reason why it's particularly insidious that this type of content brands itself as like another media reviewing channel or a discussion of philosophy, because it shows up in the recommended feeds to actual videos talking about those subjects that aren't just trying to propagandize their audience. In fact, the fact that I'm concerned about Knowledge Hub propagandizing his audience should prove that if anybody watching this video is going to say SO and Heretic are corporate chills, they just they don't care. No, it's something that concerns me, definitely, as somebody who's concerned about philosophy and the truth.
Mm-hmm. And the whole premise that they're writing upon is fundamentally false and trying to trick people into thinking that, well, everyone's just a bunch of mindless idiots who need the white saviors to come down and rescue them from their own idiocy and degeneracy. All from, of course, the top down. Honestly, it comes off as very Leninist in a sense, where Lenin argued that the people were too stupid to be able to successfully pull off a communist revolution, and therefore they need to be guided by experts and the professional revolutionaries to help make sure that it goes correctly.
Which is the frustrated authoritarian way of saying, why isn't Marx's material dialectic as he proposed it happening? Could I be wrong? No, it's the children who are wrong.
Am I out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong. And this is how they come across the idea that advertisement is mind control. I mean, now he's not even going into the whole advertisement is mind control thing. Towards the end, it's like news articles are mind control. And really, like, as I've explained, all that's really happened is that people would naturally want to be interested in what they're consuming, especially if they're going to be investing hundreds of thousands of dollars into technology. So they have an incentive to do this. However, there is an implicit belief that things are just naturally going to be good for the simple fact that if Apple doesn't put forward a quality product, then they'll get sued. Therefore, they'll get sued by the government. Therefore, it's their incentive to put forward a good product. Or at least that's the belief that they like to promote. This isn't true, of course, but this is something that they genuinely believe in. They've outsourced their own skepticism, their own judgment, and their own critical thinking to the extent to which they still have these faculties and they haven't been filed down by 12 or 16 years of government indoctrination. To the extent that they still have those faculties, they have largely been outsourced to the state, which of course has no interest at all in actual consumer protection and has every interest in ensuring the continuation of the size and power of these very large corporations that they are attempting to be very critical of. They, as Upton Sinclair figured out the hard way, they are very much useful idiots for the corporate and the state oligarchy.
And more times than not, just what I was trying to say is that more times than not, a lot of these licensing schemes or interventions that are marketed as a slight against companies like Apple are going to be used by companies like Apple against their competitors who don't have as much political clout with the state, because that's another that's a very nasty thing which corporate law does that I think is another reason why it more than deserves to be thought of as essentially the form of monopolization that these people claim to be against, but not for the reason that they think. It allows people, just based on how many licenses that they have or how many connections that they have with the courts, to go after competitors who don't have these licenses or don't have these connections. And there would be literally no conceivable way for the smaller business in this case to hold the other person accountable, because for one thing, they're not treated as an actual individual. They're treated, the corporate law establishes the concept of corporate personhood. So it's treated as some sort of intangible entity. So how would you, if they were somehow proven to be wrong, how would you even go about trying to do anything about that? Where would you even start? But because they're a corporate entity, they can do things like file patents on things that other people are selling if they don't patent them first. That is actually more insidiously something that reinforces a lot of these incentives that are supposedly products of the market, but are actually the result of precedents established by the state, things that they attempt to socially engineer society around.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have very much to add to that.
That's, as I was going to say earlier, that's kind of the irony of the deterministic statist ideologies, is that they try to say, oh, people are too stupid to make their own decisions and understand their own nature and their own thoughts. Therefore, we need people to rule over them so that the people can know what to choose, even though all humans are fallible, which is, I don't know, it somehow makes sense.
I'm looking at the
chat.
Just looking at the chat in the Discord right now.
I'm looking at the chat in the live stream right now. Jim Sterling from the Jimquisition is like, corporations supported by government did bad thing, then it's capitalism's fault. Freaking fat ass socialist doesn't understand the economy. Well, no, he doesn't. He's a shill, whether intentionally or not. He's not only a shill for state rule, but also a shill for corporate power. Because as we explained already in this stream, well, corporate power is only a thing because the state gives it power. Corporation is fundamentally a state entity. They receive special privileges that other businesses and even individuals don't have. They are restricted from liability. They can do things as though they were legally individuals. I wouldn't be surprised if a corporation got the right to vote in the not too distant future. So with this in mind, Jim Sterling has demonstrated multiple times that his ability to figure out solutions for problems that do exist in the gaming industry, actual problems, his solutions are just going to end up making things significantly worse. Yeah, Jim, go ahead. Tell us more about how EA and Ubisoft need more government regulations so that indie developers get crushed in complying with regulations that were supposedly put forward to restrict EA and Ubisoft. Please, tell us more about that.
Yeah, self-proclaimed democratic socialist doesn't understand anything. Imagine my shock.
It's weird. Anyways.
What I was going to say is, and this is something that I've attempted to make in particularly, this is a point I attempted to establish in that debate we had with a radical reviewer in re-education, although that was a shit show because nobody really knew what the other person was arguing. For future reference for debating Marxists, make it explicitly clear that economics and ethical philosophy are not the same thing. But anyway, a lot of the explanations they attempt to provide for problems with the current political economy can be better explained by the Austrian method, and I find that very interesting. For instance, the falling rate of profit argument. Well, we know there's no such thing as a rate of profit, so that's sort of dead in the water. But just what I was So if you look at the Austrian business cycle, that would better. Sorry, Chris came in the room. And
Sorry, have to grab my shoes.
caused me to lose my my train of thought. But
You're talking about
So-
the Austrian business cycle theory.
yeah, and if you look at proprietary interest rates and how they create this, they make things more capital intensive, but they also make it so what are supposed to be real resources are actually represented by debt. Well, if you take that into consideration, you can, superficially, the falling rate of profit argument kind of resembles that, except this is a better, this is a better explanation of what that is. When you look at a bag of chips, for instance, and you notice that increasingly over time, more of the bag is just air. Well, the reason why that is because there literally are not enough chips to turn a profit if they were trying to sell full bags. And they have to do that in order to continue profiting because of the interest rate manipulation.
All that's really going on is that, well, Marxists, in that respect, the falling rate of profit is actually a pretty good observation, but not in the Marxian sense. It's, if you were to rephrase it as sort of like the falling rate of return in a system of statist interest rates, it would actually be fairly insightful.
The other reason why the Marxist analysis doesn't work, that it's just greed and profit driven, is sort of as mentioning earlier. That's the opposite of how incentives work. Where you get less and things start costing more, just because of greed or the profit incentive. No, that actually ends up creating more wealth, which ends up causing the resources to become more valuable. And at the same time, less is needed to actually obtain more resources because things are becoming more valuable. But the other reason why it doesn't work is because that would assume there isn't time preference, which, I mean, we can observe time preference in the real world. So if you look at the housing speculation in the housing market, for instance, despite the fact that in and of itself largely doesn't exist due to natural property claims in the market, the fact that can even happen is sort of an indication that time preference is a thing. And the falling rate of profit would assume that, it makes a pretty vulgar assumption about people who actually produce resources, that there's just, they just are infinitely trying to obtain more material wealth. Material wealth, first of all, is not the only type of wealth that exists. Wealth is a relative concept. It's determined by what one thinks to be their own their own most highly valued preference. So the idea that people would just work themselves into the ground, it's not only not supported by how humans work, but it's also like physically impossible. Like there's no way to there's no way to work more than 24 hours. And that's what that would sort of insinuate.
One thing that I've noticed is that another assumption that they would need to make in order to really justify a lot of their points is that, well, you touched upon it earlier with time preferences, but this made me think about the fundamental assumption that you see a lot of Marxists discuss, and that is that everybody is fundamentally equal. They don't mean equal in the sense that everybody has, they're equal in the sense that you or I might say it, where everybody is equal in the sense that they have self-ownership. They're equal in the sense that they all have the same time preferences, they all have the same skills, they all have the same talents, and everybody is fundamentally an interchangeable part in society. And therefore, it goes, that any sort of differentiation between classes from the bourgeois and the proletariat must be a result of injustice, must be a result of the proletariat essentially gatekeeping access to the bourgeois. And I'm pretty sure that Knowledge Hub, maybe not in these words, but he would say that it's a way that the bourgeois would be able to exploit their position of power and authority to send forth messages that are very misleading in order to try to siphon out more of the proletariat's money. Which actually
You
makes
said the proles were gatekeeping the bourgeois, which it would be the other way around from the Marxist perspective. But I'm just clarifying.
Yeah, I'm terrible with names, so that kind of thing is probably going to be happening quite a bit. Yeah, the bourgeois would be gatekeeping the proletariat out. That's what I meant. But yeah, I mean,
What were you going to say?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it now, and I think I said earlier in the stream that if advertising is simply mind control and people will just mindlessly obey whatever advertisements are put in front of them, then you wouldn't have this multi-billion-dollar industry with trying to figure out how best to persuade people, how to get your advertisement to stand out. That revolves around all this creativity and whatnot. That just wouldn't be necessary because, according to the Marxian theory, it's in the interest of the bourgeois and the capitalist class to save as much money as possible, and every dime that they can save in advertising costs is money that they are able to keep for whatever nefarious capitalistic purposes that they seek to use that money for. With this in mind, it doesn't make sense that they would even offer a product in the first place, because if they can just put out an advertisement that just says, "Give me your money," then why do they even need to make an expense selling them a product in the first place? They can just tell people to keep giving them money.
Gotta love the irony as well. I mean, well, for one, from a materialistic analysis, there's no way to actually state what an incentive is, let alone to try and create an aggregate group incentive, because people are not a hive mind. These groups in the economy do not operate around hegemonic incentives, and markets are not hegemonic things. There are different markets for different communities, and they're going to drastically change based on the preferences of people in those communities and how those people define those markets. At least in a free society, that's how markets would be. But just what I was getting at is it's strange how Marxists never seem to apply that same sort of skepticism towards political rule itself. You have all this emphasis placed on analyzing group incentives, but they never look at the state, and they never, it doesn't even occur to them that they literally don't think that the state is a coherent organization with its own definable interests. They think of it as a representation of the will of the people, and that's sort of one of the problems with these sort of Neoplatonic ideas like materialism that I was talking about earlier. They can make these theses, but there's no way to support them, and any conclusion derived from them is entirely presuppositional.
Now, I'm not sure I agree with the idea that it's representative, that they think the government is representative of the will of the people. I think their understanding is that the government is just a meek and otherwise impotent representation of whoever happens to hold economic power at the time. And that's, I think, the primary driving force behind why the Marxist revolution transition from capitalism to socialism is so important to the dictatorship of the proletariat, because they think that if they just gain economic power, then the government will just go, well, guess we're with the proletariat now, and that's how I think they understand it.
That doesn't change what I was suggesting a moment ago. Like the will of the people, that's their idea of the vanguard socialist state. But like that's their only criticism of the state now is it's something they see as an institution that's set up to protect capitalist interests because we live in a capitalist society. I guess we'll ignore how within the if we were to try and look at that within the Marxists' material dialectic, that would create sort of that would create an infinite regress because supposedly capitalists created a state to protect their interests. So they created the state to protect their interest, but the state they can only exist with the state protecting their interests. But I don't know. Did you have anything?
Sorry.
What were you gonna say? Because I was just about to ask. Unless you have anything else to say, I think we're done.
Wait a minute. Does this mean that the Marxists agree with the Hoppians that there was no state prior to the printing press?
You guys don't even know what we found. We're gonna talk about in part 6 of the Hoppe essay. Oh my god, it's gonna totally tear apart not just like the way that Hoppians see themselves, but also the political spectrum itself.
Well, I mean, we kind of touched upon it previously, and if you've heard our own replies to the Colton Maxwell Anderson streams in reply to the parts of our essay, we haven't been talking about it on stream all that much, but we've talked about it in the Backalley quite a bit. Then you'll probably get an idea of what we're referring to. But let's just say that there's some information we found that is very, very juicy. And that video will be out shortly. I have both parts. I am just editing audio. And yeah, hopefully it'll be out. Let's see, today is Tuesday. It'll be Wednesday in like 30 minutes. So it'll probably be out on Friday.
All right. So are we streaming tomorrow?
No, not going to be able to. Sorry.
All right. Well, I was just asking because I wanted to, clarify for the viewers. I guess Friday is going to be our next stream.
Yeah, it's going to be Fridays are going to be a mini stream. So we're just going to find some low-hanging fruit and then discuss it for like an hour.
All right.
All right. So anyways, yeah, this is going to be the end of the stream. It's only like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, which isn't as long as probably could have been. But yeah, I think we discussed everything we needed to do about Knowledge Hub and his video specifically about how it's propaganda. I mean, I wouldn't even qualify as propaganda because propaganda actually likes to push forward some information, or something that resembles information. This is just straight up deception and manipulation, all the way from the very beginning, when they deliberately try to annoy you, specifically so that you would become eventually annoyed at the thing they want you to be annoyed at.
That would be an interesting debate to continue into the Discord server. Does this count as propaganda? Because you're right. Propaganda it's an attempt to try and like recontextualize information in a way that leads you to build up a misleading or just a particular narrative about something. It's a way of essentially leading you to thinking about a particular subject. But this, for the most part, is not even that. It's just outright lying about things that didn't even happen.
All right. Well, anyways, I think we're going to wrap it up here. So, yeah, thank you everyone for stopping by, and we'll see you in the next stream. Bye.